Good evening, and welcome to the second part of our series, Coping with COVID. In case we haven't met before, my name is Daniel, and I'm one of the ministers at Christ Church, Banstead. It's great to have you tuning in to listen in to our conversation this evening. To give you an idea of where we're going to start by interviewing our guest, Helen Thorne. After that, we will have a short talk from Matthew's Gospel, and finally, we'll have a time for Q&A where you can send in any mental health related questions to Helen. Please note that you can send in your questions at any point this evening, so you don't need to wait until we begin the Q&A to do that. In fact, it would be great if you could send in your questions before the Q&A so that when we get there, we can hit the ground running. Finally, it's worth mentioning that should the video stop working for any reason tonight, please close the link, go back to our YouTube page and reopen the link that way. Hopefully that won't be necessary, but if there are any video issues, then please close the link and head onto our YouTube page and reopen a fresh link. Helen, good evening.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you with us.
Oh, it's lovely to be here. Well, almost here, online.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Really lovely day. Just moved house, surrounded by boxes. Really glad you can't see the carnage that's either side of this screen.
Did you build any snowmen over the past few days?
I didn't. It was very sad. No snowman, no snowball fights. But I did take the obligatory snow picture and pop it up on Instagram. So, you know, I was proper British about it. Yeah.
Great. And Helen, how have you found this third lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy, is it? I think on one level we're starting to get used to lockdown life. We're finding ways of coping with it. But I think like everybody else, I've had good days and bad days. Days when I felt, yes, we can do this, coping all right, being productive, and other days when, well, quite frankly, I haven't really wanted to get out from underneath the duvet. It's felt much safer to stay put.
Yeah, I'm sure many can relate. And let's dive into just. I'd like us to think a bit about what you do. Tell us a bit about who you are and what you do as your 9 to 5.
Yeah, so I'm based in southwest London and I work for an organisation called Biblical Counselling UK. I'm their Director of Training and Resources. So basically that means I spend half of my time going around churches and other organisations, helping them to do pastoral care, but looking after people who are struggling, helping them to do that wisely and well, biblically, kindly. And the other half of my time, I get to spend writing books. And it's a standing joke in the office that I only ever write books on topics that people really struggle to want to read. So I write on things like self-harm and domestic abuse and things like maybe women that struggle with pornography. So all those really comfortable subjects. And I assure you, if you ever go to a dinner party and someone asks you what you write and you give them that list, the conversation topic changes very quickly indeed. But other than that, I am very involved in my local church, which is Dundonald Church in Rains Park. And there I do a lot of counselling, a lot of walking alongside people who are struggling, and a lot of time with people who are from overseas and have very limited English.
That's great, Helen. I think it's excellent that you write those books that no one else writes, because someone has to write them, and I'm sure that they've helped many people. And then tell us a little bit about how you ended up doing what you're currently doing. What was the journey?
So most of my colleagues in Biblical Counselling UK have come from the route of being a psychiatrist or being a psychologist or being a GP. Many of them have that medical psychological background. But that's not my background at all. I'm a scientist by training, but I've never actually worked in those therapeutic fields. I came into biblical counselling largely because my life was falling apart. And I experienced firsthand what it was to be helped by what the Bible was saying and by the Christian community of the church. So I first of all basically came into biblical counselling because I was a mess. And then later, having been inspired by the changes I saw in my own life, I then did some training and then went on to train others.
How long have you been doing this sort of work?
Well, I've actually been paid for it for only about 7 months now, but I've been doing it voluntarily. So before I worked for the organisation, I was a trustee of the organisation. So I used to voluntarily give my time and doing those kinds of things. And I've been doing that for the best part of 6 or 7 years now. But I've been actually counselling others for over 10 years now.
Excellent. And Helen, you mentioned how, you said your life was a mess before, a few years ago. Could you tell us a little bit about how those struggles, or when those struggles began?
The struggles began very, very early for me. I grew up in a very loving home, a fairly standard middle class kind of home, 3-bedroom semi, learnt the piano, all the kind of things that is relatively normal in the area that I grew up. But it was a hard family because my mum lost a number of babies, so there was a lot of grief around. She lost her dad at the same time as losing one of the babies, and so she found life very, very hard indeed. And so I think from my very earliest months, I think I grew up with this sort of awareness of grief around me. But I think more importantly than that, it left me quite alone and quite vulnerable at times. And very sadly, there was a man, a paedophile in the local area. And well, people like that can spot someone that's alone, can spot someone that's vulnerable. So my life from fairly early on included abuse and being manipulated by this guy. And now, things like that impact you. No one goes through experiences like that and comes out the other side unscathed. And so it wasn't long before I started becoming very fearful. It wasn't long before I stopped eating, developed an eating disorder. A little later on, I started self-harming. And then when I was a bit older still and I had a bit more independence, I started drinking very heavily indeed. And those things came together and really spiraled out of control. I think the combination of what had been done to me and what I had done to myself left me very much in a state of despair. I thought there was no hope for someone like me. I thought I was tainted and useless and worthless, hopeless. And there were moments when I just really didn't want to carry on at all. And I think that was the general journey of how it started and how life got very hard very quickly.
Helen, thanks for sharing that. And did you have a faith at all at that time while you were going through those struggles?
Not in the early days, no. So I grew up in a home where my parents were ex-churchgoers. I think they went to church until I was about 6 months old, something like that. And then for various reasons, they decided not to go to church anymore. And so that meant I grew up in a household where there were lots of Bibles around, but nobody ever read them. And there were lots of those little ladybird books sort of saying what the story is of Peter and John in the Bible were, but again, nobody read them. And there were little cards with prayers on, but nobody ever said them. So I suppose there was an awareness of God, and I was very involved in brownies and guides. So, occasionally I'd go along to church and I'd wave a flag and I'd sit through a sermon and, probably not listen particularly to what was going on. So there was a kind of awareness of God out there. There was a sort of a little link with Christianity, but there was no regular attendance at church. There was no live faith within me. God felt like a very distant reality, if he was a reality at all.
Thanks. So there wasn't really a relationship with God at all there. But you clearly have a relationship with God now. You have a faith now. What happened?
Well, when I was at university, life really did hit rock bottom. I was drinking very heavily, hurting myself very regularly, sometimes quite severely, and needing some treatment at A&E. And I was surrounded by really lovely friends who got alongside me and said, Helen, you need some help. You really do need to get some help with this. And so they walked me off to the university welfare centre where I saw a counsellor. And it was suggested that I went on this sort of outpatient rehab programme to help deal with some of the addictions, some of the depression, some of the despair that I was feeling. Now, often the case in those kind of rehab programs, those therapeutic programs, I was encouraged to find a couple of people that would walk alongside me in that process. And this lovely couple who I'd known from when I was learning the piano, actually, I used to take part in little music competitions and things like that when I was a kid. They said, Helen, look, we'll sponsor you. We'll walk alongside you. We'll be your friends as you get the help that you need to untangle the past and find some hope for the future. And those two were Christians. Over the next 6 months or so, I was basically an unbearable brat to them. I shouted at them, I screamed at them, I stormed out of their house, I slammed their front door. I told them they should just leave me alone and no one could help me and they should just give up on me. And I was really very, very horrible to them. But they stuck by me. And they loved me and they kept welcoming me back into their house and kept feeding me and inviting me to stay over. If I, was struggling to look after myself, I could, spend the night on the sofa. And they were just so incredibly kind to me. And I think after a while, I came to the conclusion either they were completely and utterly nuts or their faith made a difference. Now, I'll be completely honest with you, for quite a substantial part of that time, I just thought they were nuts. I was horrible. They just kept coming back for more. Why would anybody do that? But one Christmas, they said, Helen, why don't you come to church? We'll have mince pies. We'll go to the service on Christmas Eve. You might enjoy it. I think partly out of curiosity, and partly out of, oh my goodness, I have been awful to them. Maybe I'll just do this one nice thing. I went along to church that Christmas Eve. To be honest, I don't remember an awful lot about the service or the sermon, but I do remember being utterly captivated by the story of a God who would come down to earth as a baby to love people and to love them so much that he would be willing to do whatever it took to bring them back into relationship with him. And I remember thinking, if that is actually true, that would make a difference to my life, even as an addict, even as someone that was despairing, even as someone that didn't want to go on living anymore. If this story of Christmas was more than a story, then actually maybe, just maybe, it could help. So from that point onwards, I started going to church very regularly. And I asked so many awkward questions. I'm not the sort of person that just accepts what I'm told. So I had 6 months of going along to Sundays and midweek groups and going, why? But how do you know? What's the point of that? How can I be sure? Give me some evidence. And people very patiently talk me through, why the Bible can be trusted and what the message of Christianity is all about. And about 6 months later, I suppose it was the Lord nudging me, and I said, okay, I believe it. I believe this is true, and I'm going to start following God now. I might be depressed. I might be a recovering addict. Life might be still spiraling out of control. But actually, I think there's enough evidence to give this a go. And I'm hoping it's going to make a difference.
Thanks, Helen. So that was 6 months from when you went to the Christmas service to actually going, yes, I believe this and want to follow Jesus. So it wasn't an overnight thing. There was a lot of grappling and thinking hard about what the Christian message is. And Helen, what would you say that Christian faith that you then had not all of a sudden, but you now claim to be a Christian, what difference did that make to your life, particularly with regards to the depression?
On one level, everything, and on another level, nothing. So on the level of everything, suddenly I was in a relationship with the King of the universe. Suddenly I had heaven to look forward to. Suddenly I had a community around me. Suddenly I had the Bible to guide me. So that on one level, everything changed. But on another level, I was still depressed and I was still an addict. And it wasn't a case of come to Jesus and your life will be better. I mean, you do occasionally hear people peddling that line, but that certainly wasn't my experience. And it's certainly not been the experience of most people I know. I came to Christianity as a depressed, abused, addicted person. And I remained someone that was recovering from abuse, someone that was recovering from addiction, and someone that was depressed, probably for the first 10 years of my Christian life. I've been a Christian about 31 years now. But it did gradually start to make a massive difference. As I wrestled with the words of people who seemed to be depressed themselves. So there's songs in the Bible called the Psalms, and some of those psalmists were just going through horrible times when they were writing their songs. And they gave me words to say to God. I kind of assumed that God might want me to brush myself up and be all happy before I started talking to him. But the Psalm showed me that actually Christians struggle too. And the Bible gives us a vocabulary for expressing those depression struggles to God. I gradually began to realize that being a Christian gave me a new identity. I wasn't a depressed person anymore. I wasn't depressed Helen. I was Helen who was child of the living God, who had been given a new start. So I was precious child of God Helen, who happened to struggle with depression rather than depressed Helen, which gave me that identity that was very different. Becoming a Christian meant that some of the things I felt guilty about, so the stuff that I'd done to myself, I mean, obviously I didn't feel guilty about the abuse, that wasn't my fault, but, the addictions and some of the choices that I subsequently made were very much my responsibility. But Christianity gave me forgiveness and a freedom and a new start for all the bad decisions that I had made along the way. And this relationship with Jesus, it gave me the strength to carry on every day. I mean, I wasn't bouncing around happy, but there was God working inside me, which meant I could carry on, that it was possible to persevere and to do each day, even if it was hard. It gave me a purpose that was bigger than just trying to get better. The Bible talks a lot about there being purpose in our pain, and actually God using our pain to achieve things that are far bigger than we can imagine. And so that gave me a sense that whilst I still would quite like my depression to go away, it wasn't purposeless, it wasn't pointless while it was there. But it also gave me a hope that this God was going to change me. So little by little, I could think differently. I could see more hope, see more light. And eventually one day I'd get to heaven. And that would be completely depression-free. A whole eternity to look forward to, with no more struggles, no more despair, no more crying myself to sleep, no more lying awake at night. Even if now was still really hard, I knew something better was coming, and that was worth holding out for. And little by little, those different facets of faith just transformed my experience of depression. Didn't take it all away quickly, didn't take it all away at all, but actually meant persevering was a little bit easier. Hope was a bit quicker to see, and the future felt considerably more rosy.
Thanks, Helen. How would you say, for want of a better word, what would you say is your relationship with depression now? By that I mean, you clearly, you as you said, you suffered from depression for several years. So that was part of your life. Well, what's life been like now?
I know I want to be completely real with everybody. Sometimes I think when we're doing these talks, the expectation is we have a talk that goes, I was depressed, I met Jesus, and now I'm so happy and everything is wonderful. And to be honest, I'd be lying if I said that. I mean, everything, God is wonderful, but I still struggle. I'm not someone that bounces through life feeling happy all the time. In lockdown, like many of us, I found some of my old struggles have started to return. And there are still days when I get incredibly low, but it's not the same as it used to be. I'm no longer low on my own. I'm low with a relationship with God and a community of believers around me. I'm no longer low, but that's all there is. All I can see is the depression. I'm depressed, but I know that above my depression, there is a wonderful God who's ruling and leading and bringing purpose and building something good out of what I'm going through. I might still be depressed, but I know it's only temporary because there is something better coming. And I know that I can get through each day, sometimes limping, but I can get through each day with God's help. And I can honestly say that the depression is much less severe than it used to be. It's not gone. And some days I can still get very low, but whereas I was pretty consistently depressed all the time for years, now it's, some days are tough. Some days it comes flooding back, but other days I can see so much hope and light and love and joy. And I know that God has been changing me little by little as the years have gone on.
Thanks, Helen. I was surprised to find out that 1 in 5 people reported feeling depressed last year. And 1 in 5, that's a lot of people. Yet there still seems to be a stigma about depression. People don't like opening up about it or speaking about it, but it is such a common thing. So clearly it's nothing to be ashamed of. Why do you think so many people are ashamed of it and don't open up about it?
I think there can be a real pressure to show yourself to be a strong person, in quotes, a sorted person. There's something inside us that goes, we don't want to need the help of others. We don't want to be seen as what others might describe as weak. Not that I think depression is being weak, but sometimes that's how we feel when we're in the pit. And so I think there is that pressure to cope alone, to not be the needy one, to not have to lean on others, to not need, medication as some people will. But the reality is 1 in 5, and I'm sure that number is going to go up as the statistics from lockdowns come in. This is reality. The Bible talks about this being a broken, a fallen world where we struggle with the pain, where our bodies are broken, our minds get broken. This is what the Bible just acknowledges as reality in the here and now. And so it is really hard to admit. But I think the more of us who are open and honest and go, you know what, I am depressed. I'm not mad. I'm not one of those people that's going to drain everyone around me. But I am struggling. I think the more we can be honest about that with people around us, the more we'll find that the person we're speaking will go, oh, you know what, me too. And I think that will gradually break the stigma little by little.
And Helen, is there anything else you would say to people who are struggling with depression now, perhaps tuning in right now? What advice would you give them?
I mean, first and foremost, just know you're not alone. What you're going through is hard. It's unspeakably hard some days. But there is a God who understands what you're going through. And there are people around who want to be loving you in it. So please don't be scared to ask for help, to admit that you're struggling. Please do go and see your GP if that would be helpful. Medication isn't always the answer, but sometimes it can be a wonderful help along the way. But do please consider what can help you get through this difficult time. For some of us, that's going to be practical things like exercise and diet. For some of us, it's going to be getting some therapy. For some of us, it's going to be talking to friends. But for all of us, my experience of coming to a relationship with a God who knows me and loves me and sustains me and has plans and purposes for my depression has been utterly transformative. So why not just explore what could be helpful safe in the knowledge that no one's going to judge you, because what you're going through is just part and parcel of this very broken, hard life.
Helen, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I'm looking forward to our Q&A session a bit later on. Friends, just another reminder, if you have any questions, please do send them in. You can do that by scanning the QR code or by visiting heartslides.com/depression. So if you have any questions, please do send them in now. You don't need to wait until we begin the Q&A session. We're now going to spend a few minutes looking at a couple of sentences from Matthew's Gospel, which is an eyewitness account of Jesus's life, to see what hope Jesus offers to those experiencing depression and struggling with life, as all of us are to one degree or another with the lockdown. John Stott, who served as chaplain to the Queen for over 30 years and was regarded as one of the greatest and well-known preachers of the 20th century, described the sentences we're about to read as the greatest invitation ever made. The invitation is found in chapter 11, verses 28 to 30 of Matthew's Gospel, which you can see there on the screen. As I read these verses, I'd like you to consider what makes this invitation so special. Why is this invitation so special? Let me read. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." What is it that makes this invitation so special? It might help to first consider three questions that these verses answer. The first is, to whom is the invitation? To whom is the invitation? What is the first thing we write when preparing to send an invitation to someone? It's their name, isn't it? The first thing we do when creating an invitation is to address the person we're inviting. And that's precisely what Jesus is doing here. But instead of saying to Sally or to Stephen, Jesus says, to the weary and burdened. The invitation Jesus is making here is to those who are feeling fatigued and worn out. It is to those who are feeling weighed down by life. I recently read a piece in the Telegraph where people described their experiences of being in lockdown. I thought I'd share snippets from the stories of Loretta and Gemma, because I think what they express in their stories represents what so many up and down the country are feeling right now. Loretta, a 67-year-old widow, says, "I knew it would be a long slog when I received my letter from the NHS in March advising me to shield. I usually see my son and daughter every week and did not like the prospect of spending a few months without them. But I had no idea then how long it would last or just how draining it would be. Everything feels bleak, and it's difficult not to be overwhelmed by loneliness. I find myself glued to the news, watching the death count climbing, and I'm becoming too afraid to leave my front door for a walk." Listen also to what Gemma, a 41-year-old mother of three, says. "I feel anxious and overwhelmed pretty much all of the time. I've never cried so much in my life. Every day during this third lockdown. I always thought that I was really strong-minded, but I'm discovering that I'm not, and that is depressing in itself. It's hard not to sympathize with Loretta and Gemma. No doubt many of you can relate to their experiences. The great encouragement about Jesus' invitation is that it is for people like Loretta and Gemma and for all of us. Are you feeling weary and burdened? Thankfully, we don't need to be strong and to have it all together to qualify for Jesus' invitation. Rather, it is the admitting of our weakness that qualifies us for it. What makes this invitation so special? The fact that it's for the weary and burdened. What else makes it special? What's on offer? So what is the offer? Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." The offer is to find rest. At a time when so many of us are feeling weary and burdened, Jesus invites us to come to him for rest. I wonder what you are hoping will provide you with the rest you are longing for. Is it being vaccinated? Is it for the schools to reopen again? Is it being able to go away on holiday again to Devon, Spain, or Greece? Is it being able to spend time with a loved one again in person rather than on Zoom? As wonderful as all of those things are, can they really give us rest? Can they offer us a rest that is lasting? We live in a broken world, don't we? When it's not a pandemic upending our lives, then it's a flood, a terrorist attack, financial crisis, a grim prognosis, a lost job, or a broken relationship. The world we live in is fractured and fragile. So when we seek to find rest in anything or anyone other than Jesus, our rest is always vulnerable to being taken away. But compare that to the rest that Jesus offers. His rest is lasting. It is eternal. The rest that Jesus offers cannot be stolen by a global pandemic, a grim prognosis, or a financial crisis. His rest is permanent and forever. It is a permanent relationship with him. Now, of course, I have to add the following caveat, as Helen did when she shared her own story. Coming to Jesus for rest doesn't mean that a pandemic won't affect you. Of course, it still will. And people who follow Jesus are not impervious to mental health difficulties or to the emotional pain caused by national lockdowns and by other things life throws our way. Rather, coming to Jesus means that no matter how much we might lose, how much pain we might go through, or how lonely we might feel, we can be reassured by the comforting presence of Jesus, who offers us rest. Jesus is always with those who follow him, so that they are never alone. Though we may experience tremendous unrest in this world, knowing that we have Jesus on our side gives us a rest that is incomparable. He offers us rest in the midst of our unrest. To whom is Jesus' invitation? To the weary and burdened. What does he offer? Rest. finally, why should we trust Jesus? Why should we trust Jesus to give us rest? Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart." How would you describe Jesus? As a prophet, as a good teacher, as a miracle worker? He describes himself as gentle and humble. If you are weary and burdened, the Son of God, the creator of the entire universe, wants you to know that he is gentle and humble. Though Jesus is infinitely powerful, he is also gentle and humble. So he uses his power to help, not harm, his people. And we see this most clearly when he willingly went to the cross to die for our sins so that we can receive forgiveness if we will follow him. But not only can we receive forgiveness from him, we can also receive eternal life. Having risen from the dead, Jesus will also raise from the dead his followers so that they might enjoy glorious eternal life with him. Do we see why this is the greatest invitation ever made? The Son of God, who is gentle and humble, offers rest to the weary. A rest that cannot be taken away by a global pandemic or even death itself. My question to you today is, will you come to Jesus for the rest he offers? If you come to him, you can be certain that he will not turn you away. If you're a Christian, I hope you're comforted by the reminder that Jesus is gentle and humble towards you. If you're not a Christian, will you consider coming to Jesus? Maybe you've been considering doing that for some time by putting your faith and trust in him. If that's you, if you have been considering this for some time, why not decide to put your faith and trust in him today? You don't need to wait until you have it all together to start following Jesus. Perhaps you've never considered following Jesus before and feel like you would need to find out a bit more about him, like Helen did, before you jump in with both feet. If that's you, why not consider signing up to something like Exploring Jesus, which we are running. It's what we'll do in Exploring Jesus is we'll look at a gospel, the Gospel of John, which is another eyewitness account of Jesus' life. And in 6 sessions, we'll consider the teachings of Jesus. You could obviously come to all 6 sessions if you'd like to, but equally, if you'd just like to come to one to try it out, you'd be most welcome. I highly encourage you to sign up to Exploring Jesus if you would like to consider following Jesus. Details as to how you can do that can be found on our website. And also there will be a sign-up form on the ahaslides.com/depression link, which you can see there just under my face. We're now going to have our Q&A time. Hopefully we'll have loads of questions ready. Allow me to give me a second to open up those questions. Sorry, my laptop. Oh, that did not sound good. Is it echoing, Helen?
I can hear you.
Okay. Great. Folks, thank you so much for sending in your questions. I can really see several here. And the first question, you said the Psalms in the Bible gave you a vocabulary to speak to God. Which Psalm did you find most useful, and what does it say?
Thank you. That's a great question. And different Psalms on different days. There's one Psalm, Psalm 88, which is particularly close to my heart because it really doesn't have a cheery verse in it. It's all about how hard life is. A lot of Psalms kind of
the gloomiest Psalm.
Yeah. So often kind of Psalms start, life is hard, but they end, I'm going to trust you, Lord, which is great. But this one is just, life is hard. And it includes words like, I am overwhelmed with troubles and my life draws near to death. And it feels like it encapsulates what encapsulated what I was going through at the time. But not just Psalm 88. There are others like Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. And depression, I think describing depression as a slimy pit, as mud and mire, just resonates with my experience so much. And that image of God lifting me out of it, little by little, was a very powerful one for me. There are so many others that have helped me when I was angry, when I was reflecting on the abuse. Vindicate me, Psalm 43 starts, vindicate me, my God, and plead my cause against the unfaithfulness. Rescue me from those who are deceitful and wicked. I think whether I was despairing, whether I was angry, whether I was trying to express my trust in God, Psalm 43 ends, put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Saviour and my God. It expressed that choice to trust, even though I was feeling desperately broken. There are 150 Psalms in the Bible. There is a verse there that will express pretty much anything that we're going through.
Excellent. Here's another question, Helen. It says, I've read some Christian books on depression / anxiety that unhelpfully painted them as sinful and your own fault for not trusting God enough. Are there any books that are more pastorally sensitive?
Yeah, I've read a few of those myself, and they really don't help, do they? There's a book, an American book by a friend of mine called Edward Welsh, who works for an organisation called CCEF, which is basically the biblical counselling organisation in the States. It's called Looking Up from the Stubborn Darkness. It's quite a big book, but I've always found that one very helpful indeed. I've got my own little book on anxiety coming out later this year called Hope in an Anxious World, which I really hope doesn't fall into the trap of being pastorally insensitive. I apologise in advance if it does. Depression and anxiety, I certainly don't characterise them as sins. As I was saying earlier, sometimes in our depression and our anxiety, we make choices which are not helpful. And I think sometimes it's good to read books that we do nudge us and go, come on, let's not make things worse. Let's go back to the Lord and let's look at how you're handling what's going on. But absolutely, we don't need to categorize depression and anxiety as sin. They are struggles, and we want to treat them as struggles.
Thank you, Helen. And what role does medication play in resolving depression?
Yeah, medication is one of those things that it can be helpful. It's not the silver bullet. It doesn't, it's not like an antibiotic. It doesn't kill the depression. It takes some of the symptoms away. And you know what? If you're in a really bad pit, actually having some of those symptoms alleviated can be a wonderful thing. So if you go to your GP, if you get diagnosed with depression and they say, do you want to try some medication to kind of take the edge off the symptoms? Then why not? There's no shame in taking medication. These things help. They can help give us clarity of thought so we can engage in other things of life like counselling or exercise and eating healthily and friendships well. So I think medication has a role, but I guess I discourage for people from thinking medication is going to make it all better. because depression, like so many things in life, is multifaceted. It's sometimes about what we're thinking and believing. It's about our experiences. It's about biochemistry. There's so many things coming together. If medication is going to help, go for it. But actually, there'll be other things that can help as well.
Speaking of help, someone mentions here prayer. Did prayer help? And either you praying or people praying for you?
I have been privileged throughout my life to always have a band of little prayer warriors who have been praying for me. And I have absolutely no doubt that that has helped. Because there certainly have been times when I've been so low in and of myself, I've not wanted to carry on living another single moment. And that's not the sort of thing that just changes overnight. But sometimes I've seen hope very strongly when I've been in a very bleak place. And I am happy to say that, that has been answered prayers of others. But also, praying has certainly helped me. I think, like many people, when I am depressed, I can sometimes find prayer quite hard. So sometimes I keep my prayers quite short. Sometimes I write down prayers, so it helps my concentration, because when we're depressed, actually concentrating can be one thing we struggle with. But actually, prayer brings us into a much more conscious relationship with the living God. And rather than just going, I wish this was better, you end up talking to the person who can change things, because most human beings can't change the circumstances of life, but God does have that power to do that. And so talking to the one that can make a real difference is both a wonderfully relational, intimate thing. And it's nice to, not be alone in depression, but it also brings hope that the one with real power has been communicated with, and because he loves us, is going to be doing something that is good.
Thank you. You spoke a little bit about self-harm earlier. Someone here asks, how can the cycle of self-harm be broken and the guilt associated with it as well?
Yeah, self-harm is incredibly complex. And so I can only give you a really, really short answer here, I'm afraid. But I think the key is to understand why we're self-harming. In the little book that I wrote, I kind of gave 4 categories. If we're self-harming, we're probably either trying to cleanse ourselves because we feel there's bad stuff inside, or we're trying to control something because we feel life is out of control, so we're going to control what's happening to our patch of skin, or we're trying to punish ourselves for something because we feel guilty, or we're trying to bring sensation to ourselves because we feel numb. And if we can work out which, or it might be more than one of those categories our self-harm is falling into, then rather than just focusing on the behavior, which of course is important, we can look at what's driving that behavior. And so rather than trying to cleanse ourselves, then we can, reflect on just how much God has cleansed us. Rather than trying to punish ourselves, we can reflect on how much God has forgiven us. Rather than trying to control ourselves, we can reflect on how loving a king God is. So there are some kind of foundational things that we can bring God's truth to bear on the things that we're struggling with. But on a very practical level, and anyone can do this, we can keep a diary of when we're self-harming. We can note when the triggers are. We can avoid those triggers or prepare for those triggers. We can find different ways of expressing our emotions, whether that's journaling or exercise or art or music. And little by little, we can just catch ourselves when we're feeling tempted and go, you know what? I'm going to choose to do it differently now. I'm going to ask for a friend to help. I'm going to ask a friend to pray. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to write down my feelings. I'm going to try and deal with what's going on in my life without causing myself harm. And aspire to something better, to treating, and our bodies are a gift from God. And so treating them like a precious gift rather than something that it's okay to harm. And in the middle of all that, just getting our identity right. Often when we're self-harming, we think of ourselves as some miserable worm, guilty, useless, worthless, pathetic. But that's not how God sees us. God sees us as precious image bearers, people that have purpose and value. If we're following him, he describes us as his children, secure in his family, loved, adored, cleansed and precious in his sight. He delights in us. And when we can see ourselves like that, it becomes a lot harder to hurt ourselves. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen overnight. It's good to get help from GPs and counsellors and friends and to read books on identity. But little by little, we can break its snare and freedom can come.
Thanks, Helen. You mentioned how counselling is obviously very helpful. Someone asked there, counselling, okay, but why biblical counselling?
Secular counselling in any way. I myself have benefited from secular counselling. Lots of people I know have. So please don't see this as me in any way putting down secular counselling. But I think if we genuinely believe there is a God who is ruling us over the world and the universe, if we genuinely believe that God is loving and cares for us, if we genuinely believe that God is intimately involved in our lives and wanting to change us day by day to be more the people that he's called us to be, if we genuinely believe that rather than looking inside us to find the hero within to do that changing, it's better to look up to a God who can change us day by day by his own action, then it's worth engaging with what he has to say. And in the Bible, we find a whole swathe of material that shows us who we are, what our identity is. We find mechanisms for change, and the taking off of our old self, the putting on of our new self, to have our minds transformed so we can think differently. We find stories of a God who meets people where they're at and leads them through difficult paths into greener pastures, into better places, into better ways of being. We meet a God who loves us so much that he's willing to wipe the slate clean from all the stuff that we've messed up in the past. We can't turn back time and make it all better, but God can give us a new start. And that's what biblical counselling helps us to engage with. Secular counselling helps us understand ourselves. It helps give us strategies. It helps us articulate goals and to think differently. And they are wonderful things. But biblical counselling brings us into conversation with a God who adores us, has plans for us, is changing us, is offering us a free new start and a new way of doing life. Now, some of you may not find that particularly appealing. Fair play if you don't. But to me, that just lightens my heart to know that I don't have to do this all by myself. The strength doesn't have to come from me. It comes from the King of the universe. That gives me far more hope. And I love talking about that with people because I see the hope and the possibilities that brings into their life as well.
Thanks, Helen. There's a question here. How do you recognize the difference between tiredness and depression? It says in a friend, but I guess this might be helpful to know how to recognize it in ourselves as well. So how do we recognize the difference between tiredness and depression?
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that it's not always easy to recognise that. So I'm not sure I can give you a diagnostic tool in a couple of moments that will make that abundantly clear. But I think if we're just tired, and I use the word just very lightly because exhaustion is a horrible, horrible thing, then obviously getting some rest will make a difference. If we're depressed, that rest won't make much of a difference. It might make a small difference, but it won't make much. If we're tired, we might find that our thoughts get a bit muddly, but we're still capable of actually, unless we're at the extremes of exhaustion, we're still capable of knowing that God is good, we are loved, and the people around us are on our side. When we're depressed, or that kind of thinking tends to get very skewed, and we think God doesn't care, and we're horrible people, and those around us are out to get us. And I think we just tend to look at the longevity of it as well. I mean, obviously, if you've just got a newborn baby, you're going to be tired for quite some weeks and months, but there's a very obvious trigger for that. But if you're tired for weeks and months and there isn't so much of an obvious trigger, then maybe looking at depression as a possible source. Obviously, there can be other sources, but a possible reason for that tiredness. That would be a good thing to do. But if in doubt, just give your GP a bell. They'll have a diagnostic tool to work out whether you fit on the depression scale or not. Get your friend to do that. And that can be a fairly easy way of teasing out whether it is tiredness or whether it's something more.
Thanks, Helen. I think we have time for one more question. How can we as Christians best help and support those, both Christian and not Christian, who suffer from depression?
It's just to love them. We talked earlier about sometimes we can feel judged for having depression, or we should just pull ourselves together as if that's possible. But just accepting people how they are and loving them in the middle of it is a really good start. I think then listening to what their experience of depression is, because everyone's experience of depression is really different. Even me as someone that's had a really long history with depression, I don't fully understand what someone else is going through. So asking them in whatever ways they want to articulate their experiences, that can be a good way of helping them feel heard and understood. We can pray for them. We can open God's word with them and share some of those words of hope. I'm not talking about doing massively long Bible studies, but just the odd verse here or there, or just talking about a story like a character like Elijah, who knew what it was like to come to the end of his tether and to want to give up. And just, point to how people have persevered through depression. We can talk about who God is, that he's our rock, our refuge, the one we can turn to, the shepherd who's leading us, the one who's loving us, the one who's sustaining us. We can talk about how God is providing for us day by day. And then let's just do really practical stuff for each other as well. Let's take each other meals. Let's go for a walk with one another. Exercise is phenomenally good for depression. Scientific studies show that the effect of exercise is one of the best things that you can do if you are struggling with depression. So going out for a walk with somebody, use your Labrador for the glory of God and the good of people around, to just get out there and go around the streets of Banstead. And then just, sending people notes, listening to music together, just helping people see joy. Not in a trite, happy way, but to see that even in the depths of depression, there still are things that are good, and there still are things that we can be thankful for. Helping people to lift their eyes to those good things is a wonderful, wonderful way. We got so far. We got within a minute of this ending, and the cat. One of the good things I can give thanks for.
Helen, thank you so much. It's been so good having you join us tonight. Thank you for taking the time out. It's been great to hear your story and also to have you answer these questions.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you so much for tuning in from home. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us this evening. Remember, if you'd like to sign up to Exploring Jesus, if you're not a Christian and would like to find out more about Jesus, please do sign up to Exploring Jesus. Again, you can do that on the link that you see there, but also on our website, christchurchbanstead.org. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.